Welcome to the Prime Health Podcast with your host, Dr. Derek Barron. Dr. Barron interviews doctors, wellness experts, and healthcare leaders who are revolutionizing how we approach health and longevity. The Prime Health Podcast explores breakthrough science, personal and patient stories, and practical insights that are shaping the future of health and wellness. So sit back, listen in, and prepare to transform how you think about your path towards Prime Health with Dr. Barron and his special guest.
Welcome back to the Prime Health Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Derek Barron, and I'm here to bring you cutting-edge insights and practical strategies from leading healthcare experts for your journey to Prime Health in life and in business. Now, did you know that there is a gap in modern medicine, or should I say in green modern medicine? Cannabis is being produced at scale, sold at scale, but rarely explained with care. Now, today's guest is Elisabeth Mack. She's a nurse entrepreneur of holistic caring and the green nurse. She sits in the gap, translating cannabis real-world medical guidance, supporting providers to educate and work with their patients so cannabinoids work as therapeutic options. Now, I'm excited to learn about this because it's a very intriguing topic for me. But before we jump into the episode, just a quick message from our sponsor, Growth Solutions, your growth partner that turns healthcare expertise into market leadership, one strategic move at a time. We eliminate stressors in the business, such as new patient or client acquisitions, marketing and growth strategies, reducing operational chaos with proven systems, frameworks, and SOPs. And yes, we even help you with those crazy AI bots that are out there because they're coming for us whether we want it or not. So if you ever thought this to yourself, I'm too busy to grow, too slow to scale, or too overwhelmed to fix it, we are your solution. So drop the word grow below or feel free to reach out to me on any platform. But you came here to hear this amazing guest today. Elisabeth, welcome to the Prime Health Podcast. Please tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Derek, for the invitation. So, I'm the CEO of Holistic Caring and the Green Nurse, as well as Bloom Hemp CBD. And our mission exists to bridge the gap between cannabis and plant medicines and conventional healthcare, which I've been a part of for the last 38 years as a registered nurse. We do this with, the ability to empower patients and professionals with education, nurse-guided care, and evidence-based cannabinoid protocols that can restore balance, reduce suffering, and improve quality of life. Conventional healthcare is struggling. We're spending almost $5 trillion on it, but our outcomes are not what we want them to be. And plants and holistic modalities, helping people to live better, is what we're all about. And so that's the short of it.
Yeah. Well, there's some long of it too that we'll get into, and I'm excited for that. For me, it's an extremely interesting and a startup venture for me getting into. So I really do appreciate having you as a guest. So I do want to I ask all my guests, was there a moment in life or a circumstance that you went through any point in time in your lifetime that said, you know what, I'm going to choose a career in medicine?
Well, gosh, as far as medicine, that we have to go back to 1983 when I first graduated high school and went to nursing school. And got a Bachelor of Science in Nursing, Bachelor of Arts in Psychology, finished in 87, worked in the VA and conventional hospitals for the first almost decade. But I knew I wasn't really cut out for staying in direct patient care for forever. And so I got my MBA in healthcare administration, and then I spent the next 20 years in insurance companies. And so I was in managed care operations, clinical operations, general operations, and then sales. And my last corporate position was the regional sales manager for Anthem Blue Cross for the County of San Diego. And I oversaw all of the broker distribution for medical, dental, life, vision, all of the insurance plans that we were selling to finance America's healthcare. But what happened, how did I get into cannabis? That's, the $1 million question. And I like to bicycle, and I crashed. And so I had some injuries, and I needed surgery on my shoulder. And after the surgery, I went to my chiropractor's office, and I love my chiropractor. I was getting adjusted, and she goes, "You're doing good. Why don't you have my medical massage therapist work out, some of the kinks here and see if that helps?" So I said, okay. And so I went and had the medical massage in her office, and the woman, Denise, she was using cannabis in the oil. And I said, "Hey, what is this? It smells funny." And she said, it's cannabis. And I'm like, why are you putting cannabis on me? She goes, well, it's anti-inflammatory. It's going to reduce your pain. It's going to soothe your muscles and help you work in PT better and get back to that pre-surgical arm faster. And so I said, wow, sign me up and tell me more. And literally, as I went home from that appointment, the library was on the way. I stopped in, I got a bunch of books on cannabis and started reading them. And I said, why didn't anybody ever tell me about this? Because fast forward, I also found PubMed and started to read, more of the research on how this is an anti-inflammatory, how these compounds work. And then I also kept going back and getting weekly massages once I had the first one. And then she also gave me some tinctures and some CBD capsules. And once I started taking the CBD capsules, something really changed inside me. And I said, I don't need the ibuprofen as much. I don't need the muscle relaxants. I'm not as stiff. I'm not hurting. There's really something to this. And that's how I ended up changing my career. It took about a year for me to leave insurance. Yeah. But, I really said, if I can help myself, I've got to help all the other people out there with chronic pain. Because not only was it an acute injury, but I found myself healing from things that I had been struggling with for the 20 years previously.
Wow.
Blood pressure, that started to go down. Stress, insomnia, sleep. Being able to relax, not feel like I was agitated or anxious or any of those things. And then on top of the pain, my appetite improved. I started to crave healthier foods. Everything started to snowball in the right way. Yeah. And you don't really get that right track very often, but that's what happened to me. And that's how I fell so deeply into cannabis therapeutics, because it really does work as a medicine.
Yeah. What I find interesting, Elisabeth, that I love how you were in healthcare first and then got your MBA. There are many people that aren't in healthcare and they get their MBA in healthcare just because they think that they should. I think it's a great transition in there. And then you saw from underneath the hood of the car, working with insurance companies is what's going on. And then you unfortunately had to experience that life incident that turns out to be a good situation. Maybe you still have a little bit of pain from it here and there, but turned out to be a good situation because it was a true transition in your life. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, no, you don't get a wake up call like that very often. And it was also, at a very important crux in my life where I had just become widowed. And the other thing is I was implementing the Affordable Care Act, right? We all know Obamacare. Yeah. And so brokers were yelling at me. They're like, you're raising our premiums, you're cutting benefits, you're making everything all complex and doubling compliance and cutting commissions. And, it's like, it wasn't happy days. Right? Yeah. And so, when I looked into cannabis, and then I started, and mind you, this is 2015. So this is, the beginning inklings of the cannabis industry in San Diego, where I lived for 30 plus years. And I'm in Palm Springs now. But, I started to interact with the industry and found, people are making medicines. This is one of my taglines. People are selling these medicines, but nobody is interpreting clinically how to use cannabis as a medicine. And that's what I set out to do.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you did because it's helping educate me. And it sounds like you're educating a tremendous amount, which we'll talk about in some of the businesses. But I do have to ask, what is, in your opinion, and I'm sure many more, what is so special about the endocannabinoid system and really the way plant medicine can bridge that gap between conventional care and then cannabis itself?
Well, when we think about our 11 other body systems, right, our circulatory, our endocrine, our neuromuscular, all of them, they all have the endocannabinoid system sitting on top of it. And so the endocannabinoid system, in short, is a regulatory system that regulates all of the other 11 body systems, along with our immune system, our neurotransmitters, all of our signaling in between cells. And it does so through retrograde signaling. I don't want to bore people, but think about, normal neurotransmission. It goes from the presynaptic to the postsynaptic. Well, endocannabinoids are released from the postsynaptic to go back to the presynaptic to plug in to the CB1 or CB2 receptors, the cannabinoid receptors. And what that does is generally downshift the stress response, downshift inflammation, cytokines, all of the things that are causing problems, so that we can come back to balance at the cellular level. Now imagine that in the brain, imagine that in the shoulder, imagine that in the gut, imagine that, wherever it is in the body. And what happens is, as we age, the endocannabinoid system becomes less efficient. Also, our diet. We're not eating healthy fatty acids, which are the precursors to forming the endocannabinoids. And then the receptor tone is also implicated in aging, and some of the distress, chronic stress, pharmaceuticals, all of the things that we're putting in, are not doing us any service. And so anyway, there's this system that cannabinoids from the plant plug into and help us restore balance. And this is all new science. I mean, if you go back to the 60s, back in 64, THC and CBD were identified in the molecular structure. And then they started to tag them with radioactive, imaging, and saying, where does this go when we put these compounds into the body? And they put people in scans, and they said, we light up like a Christmas tree. There are literally CB1 and CB2 receptors in our entire body, almost on every one of our cell membranes. And so they're kind of like, the wide receiver saying, hey, I'm open, give me the ball. But if we're not able to make the endocannabinoids, then we're deficient. And if we're deficient, then we fall further and further into chronic disease and pain states. And so what we want to do is keep this toned, and the best way to keep our endocannabinoid system toned is really with good, healthy diets, whole food, nutrition, rest, good sleep, and movement. When we have cardiovascular exercise, that is the best way to keep the endocannabinoids going and to create new ones. In fact, anandamide is released when we are in moderate cardiovascular exercise. And ananda is Sanskrit for bliss. And this is our first endocannabinoid identified back in 1992. 2-AG came in 95. But we're hardwired for this plant. And what people don't know is that, if you supplement with these phytocannabinoids, these plant nutrients, then we can bring our body back into balance and therefore start to make real headway on the other conditions that we're managing. But it takes time, right? It's not like a pharmaceutical where it just plugs into a single molecule and you've got this desired effect or side effects. It takes time for this to start to really work, and people lose patience, which is why guidance and clinical care is so needed.
Yeah, great point. So we'll get into the guidance and the clinical care here in a minute, but basically, if I'm hearing you right, this exact system is sitting out there waiting to be utilized. Whether you are, no matter what you're doing yourself, like all of us have it. We aren't implementing something to allow it to use it for its fullest potential in ourselves.
Correct.
Okay. And that's where in this endocannabinoid system, as you start to find what works best for you, as you educate these individuals, then the CBD products can assist in that. And your entire system, I think, is you want to help providers, healthcare providers, educate their patients along the way where they can fully optimize their body.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so my role, initially when I back in 2015, 2016, I founded the company, and started to work with patients directly, started to go in dispensaries and do education, to teach people, speaking in libraries, speaking in community centers and senior centers and all of that. And then I started working with some palliative care physicians and integrative physicians, working with their patients. And, really, if you go back to what I was doing at Anthem Blue Cross, taking care of 1,000 brokers in the county, my job, what I really want to do, and what I then subsequently began, was training the trainers, right? So the providers have a patient base that all need to get this education. I'm one person. So if I created the provider training so that I could then have them be competent and able to communicate how cannabinoids work, because people have dispensaries. I know you're in Idaho, not necessarily there, but there's dispensaries everywhere. I live in California, and we have about 3,500 of them. And so there's dispensaries everywhere, but people aren't getting the guidance. Doctors should be able to say, you have an endocannabinoid system. Most of us are running deficient in our endocannabinoid tone. You can supplement with these compounds. Now it just becomes all about pharmacology. What is CBD? What is THC? How do they work differently? How do we use them in different proportions and ratios? What about CBN and CBG and some of the minor cannabinoids? And then what are the different routes of administration? Right? You can inhale it, which was what most people are comfortable with, or not. Most people want to smoke pot because that's getting high, but that's a whole different segment. We don't talk about the recreational approaches. It exists. It's never going to not exist. It's always been here. But what has happened is that you have all these other routes, right? So dose forms in tinctures, the drops that you can put under your tongue, and you get systemic activation right there in the oral mucosa, and then you swallow it, goes through digestion. Then you've got capsules and soft gels, you've got gummies, you've got topicals that you can use, just at the localized level. And a lot of times I tell people you need something on the inside systemically and the outside locally, so that you have inside-outside benefits. There's patches, there's vaping, and if people want a vape pen, they should get a 1-to-1, so you have some CBD, so you're not using too much THC, because THC is the psychoactive component. And our slogan, one of them, is heal without the high, because people don't want to be high. None of our clients want to be high. They all say, I want to be better, but I don't want to be high. So how do I do that? And that's what we do. We help them put together a toolkit so that then they can go and be proficient, in their own self-care, smarter, stronger self-care. And so providers have to provide the basic education with respect to what I just elaborated on, plus the safety considerations, how to use it with pharmaceuticals, when to take them. And on that note, I always tell people, take the pharmaceuticals first, allow them to metabolize a little bit in the body. An hour or two later, now you can use your cannabinoids internally, systemically. Really, then it's all about tracking and gauging cause and effect. And when I set up tracking logs for patients, we're looking at memory, mood, pain, sleep, anxiety levels, focus, concentration, and sometimes blood sugar, blood pressure. And you want to look at them as gauges, right? So on your pain, 1 to 10, where are we starting at? And then, where are we at now? And then let's look at some of the other indicators to see, are you using too much THC? Are you dopey and sleepy and your short-term memory is not working? Or are you good? Are you able to focus and have creative energy? So it's a dance. And so we teach people this. And of course, you have to slow down to really tune into the body. And the provider has to not just look at objective data, right? It's not like, I put you on a blood pressure medicine and I'm just, checking the numbers in 3 weeks. This is different.
Right. Elisabeth, if somebody smokes / inhales marijuana, they get their benefit, if you wish, but then the CBD product gives a completely different benefit, right? So there's two of them, because I think most people will think of, you kind of mentioned it, but the misconception of, I don't want to get high, I want to benefit without it. And that's where the CBD products come into play more so.
Exactly. So CBD, so there's two main components to the plant. There's THC, which is the psychoactive component that alters your senses, changes, mood, your memory, your motor functions, perceptions, sensations. Everything becomes, funny, more crystal clear, etc. You go outside and nature looks different. There's THC, but THC also has incredible therapeutic use, and it's a direct agonist plugging into CB1 and CB2 receptors throughout the body. So we want THC, but in small doses. And you can use it in subperceptual amounts, which will not cause any intoxication or high. but it will still be therapeutic. Now, CBD is the other component. That is the non-psychoactive part of the plant. And CBD is an anti-inflammatory, it's a neuroprotectant, antioxidant. When we think about, what it can do is limiting some of the inflammation, reducing some of the cytokines, in hot red joints that are painful to people. It can help with neuroinflammation in the brain when we have, depression or dementias or neurodegenerative conditions. It can help as an antioxidant. Think about like the rusting factor of, metabolic, systems in the body, or especially in the brain. And that's why it has a patent on it. In fact, in 2003, the U.S. government issued a patent on cannabinoids as neuroprotectant antioxidants. And that is to prevent and minimize decay and damage in ischemic insults. So think stroke, think CTE, think about some of the other things. This is where cannabinoids can be extremely therapeutic. And most of that is all CBD, right? CBD is what I call the medical miracle. THC, we want to use strategically and target it. But CBD is the blanket that everybody should be having. And the problem is, think about the commercialization of the industry. The cannabis industry, started on the backs of patients, starting with solving the problem for patients, starting for people with cancer and chronic pain and autism and epilepsy. And epilepsy, so we have Epidiolex, that is an FDA-approved version of CBD. And it's, 60 plus therapeutic effectiveness with respect to seizures, especially the refractory ones like Lennox-Gastaut and Dravet syndrome. And so, CBD is extremely therapeutic, but what happened was the industry diverted from that. And it really became all about recreation. It became about social equity issues. It became about, repairing the war on drugs. It became about, the harms in society from all of that. And then just the normalization of adult use. And so adult use, now there's consumption lounges, which is good. People are using it as an alcohol replacement, and a harm reduction away from other drugs, illicit drugs. People are, not using cocaine. They're weaning off opiates. They're weaning off benzodiazepines, and they're not drinking as much. And it really is good for that. But we've missed the medical miracle of what CBD and the minor cannabinoids can do. And that's why I ended up buying another company, Bloom Hemp CBD. So we run Holistic Caring and the Green Nurse, which is our education, coaching, and consulting company where we do provider training and patient coaching. But Bloom Hemp CBD, we bought 3 years ago. It was created in 2018 when the U.S. Farm Bill was signed that created the whole CBD industry. And they ran it for several years until they created Bloom Distribution to focus on, white labeling for a lot of different brands. And so we ended up acquiring Bloom Hemp so that we would be able to have the pharmacy component to our ecosystem. You have the education and the training, you have the provider mentoring, you have the patient coaching and care and consulting and education, and then you have the good vetted quality products, which is all USDA organic, symptom targeted, Ayurvedic formulated, and having COAs, the certificate of analysis by the batch for every one of the products so that people know exact potency of what these cannabinoids are. Because then, when you're choosing, there's only so much time and money, right? And so if we can fast forward people's outcomes and success by giving them smarter answers and protocols. And we do that through, offering a free care plan at Bloom Hemp. On the services tab, we have an intake form where people fill out about 10 questions. They submit that. We send them back a treatment plan the next day. Here are some of the product recommendations along with the rationale, some of the research to substantiate why we might suggest this for that condition. And then, we offer a free nurse line so that they can call in and say, hey, here's what I'm noticing 3 weeks in. What do you think? How do I adjust my flow? And so, we really, remember, I came from an HMO, right? So, running the cannabis, like an HMO, like a managed care model, is really what I'm all about, which is why I need to train providers so that we can continue to scale.
Yeah. Well, that brings me to this point. So you've sold me on the fact that almost everyone should be using some type of a product that deals with CBD because of the cannabinoid system that's there. Why not take advantage of it? So we need providers that are in healthcare that are out there that be that go-between for what you do. So I'd love for you to go maybe a little bit deeper on holistic caring and the green nurse and exactly how that you use your company to educate healthcare providers for them to reach more masses on how they can implement this into their bodies, into their practice, I guess.
Absolutely. So thank you. So holistic caring and the green nurse, when I started, again, remember I was doing one-on-one patient care and community coaching. But what happened was COVID, right? Everything shut down. So go back to 2020 when we couldn't be in public and, you needed 10 feet between you at the Trader Joe's line,
Right.
and so what happened was I met an educator, a master's in education, and I said, I have all of these beautiful presentations and details in PowerPoint and Word documents. Let's put it all together into an online system so that we can then, set this out. Instead of just San Diego County or Southern California, we could make this national. And that's what happened. So now we have cannabis health coach programs where for nurses, remember I'm a nurse, and so I became a provider for the Board of Registered Nursing in California. So we could issue continuing education units to nurses, but all providers of all stripes can go through these programs. And it contains, starts with the history, then of the endocannabinoid system and cannabis itself. It's been used as a medicine since 5000 BC, back in China, etc. So we elaborate on all of that. And then we elucidate the endocannabinoid system and paint the picture of the research and how it was all discovered. And then we go into the pharmacology and then the products and the different routes and the basics of dosing, the medicalized approach, and then the risks. And the side effects and the contraindications. And, there are certain people that should not use THC. So, for instance, people with psychosis, bipolar disease, unstable mental health issues, unstable cardiovascular issues. They should not be using inhalation, but low doses of THC is fine through oral routes. But you have to acclimate to that. Another thing is, you can introduce THC in very small amounts and then stair step up. As the body gets tolerance, it's able to take it so that, at some point, if somebody has cancer, and you need high doses of THC because THC is the one that can trigger apoptosis, can help those cancer cells turn off and erode tumors and get those to shrink. It's anti-proliferative, anti-metastatic, and inhibits angiogenesis. And so we can starve those cancer cells and start to treat cancer patients. And it also helps stimulate appetite and it limits nausea. It's an antiemetic. It's great for pain. It's great for insomnia. So imagine a cancer patient with 10 different pharmaceuticals. We can bring in a good CBD THC oil, like in a 1-to-1 ratio, and get them to start increasing the dosing of that and start to wipe out all of those other pharmaceuticals. And so this is why I get so excited and why the doctors need to learn. Yeah. So you teach all of that, and then so I just elaborated on cancer, but think about dementia, right? And this is another very exciting thing. I love seniors, I love older adults, and where I really started working with the palliative care team. And so when you've got neurodegenerative conditions, you've got brain cells dying and they're not having the same connectivity that they need to have memory and function and cognition. And when we think about dementia, we're losing acetylcholine esterase. And THC actually inhibits acetylcholinesterase, keeping more acetylcholine to keep more brain cells working properly. And that's why very, very low doses, I'm talking like 0.5 milligram to 1 milligram, and then a little bit more, as we go. But 1 milligram a couple of times a day is a game changer for people with dementia. And nobody knows this, right? Of course, you need CBD in the background to hold it. You think about a basket of eggs. you've got that one little egg on the top with THC. The rest of them are CBD, CBG, CBN, THCV, the acidic versions, CBDA and CBGA, THCA, where it's never been processed and heated. And so we talk about all of these different things, and then so module 2 is all the conditions, right? So from cancer to chronic pain to weaning people off opiates and the protocols to do that, to the neurodegenerative, the neurological, autism and epilepsy, ADD. Then we look at all the gastrointestinal things and digestion, metabolic, diabetes. All of these can be helped with modulating the endocannabinoid system. So that's all of module 2. And then module 3 is all of the business, right? What is the legalities, state by state, and how do I track this and find out what the jurisdiction is around me? And then provider legalities, what are the scope and standards of practice? What are the different healthcare settings, and where is cannabis allowed? And increasingly, it's more and more allowed. We have programs like the Ryan's Law here in California, where hospice patients are allowed to take their cannabinoid, non-smokable formulations, into the hospital should they have to be readmitted for anything. Because what happened was, somebody stabilized, they don't want to resume opiates, because a lot of people have a horrible reaction to opiates. Not just the constipation, but the drowsiness, the dopiness. It's horrible for them. And if you're doing well on cannabis oils and you need to go back in for something acute, then you shouldn't have to go back to that. And so that was the precedent where Ryan's Law was elaborated. Now there's other models across the country where that's popping up. And so, but it's still a Schedule 1 drug. Now we're working on that, right? And so Schedule 1, just to go off on that, means that there's no medical benefits, it's highly addictive, dangerous, and abusive, and that there is no safe way to use it clinically. That's about to fall. In December 18th, President Trump signed an executive order to start the process of rescheduling. This was initiated in the Biden administration back in 23, and then 24, and HHS has been working with the FDA to get the DEA to take it out of Schedule 1. And as soon as that happens, then we can have more therapeutic benefits and pharmaceutical versions of cannabis. And then we'll have a dual policy lane, right? So there will stay the botanical state-sponsored programs, but there will also be Schedule 3 products that the pharmaceutical companies will start making. And so what's in Schedule 3? That would be the peers, Marinol, which is synthetic THC, and then ketamine, testosterone, steroids, certain things like that. And so that's where it would sit. So, we're still waiting on when that's going to be finalized. But not only did they say that that's going to happen this year, but also that CBD will be built into benefits for Medicare. So CMS is looking to increase a benefit of CBD for certain conditions. They haven't elaborated yet on what those are, but we're very excited to stay up on that legislation. And I post all of this in the network that we have all of our programs in, where we have a community and dialogue and a feed. It's all private, off social media. And so it's like a Facebook for cannabis medicine, which is what we've created. So everything's in the network, and so the module 3 talks all about the legalities and where we are on things, as well as how to get involved and how to get a license, how to involve yourself in the industry, where the jobs are, where the different consulting aspects are, and that sort of thing. So this is my life work to create this, as you can see.
You're very excited, as we said before when we spoke before, which I think is fantastic. But it seems like you have the educational system of providers and almost like a partial business in a box, as you're telling them that listen to us, we'll help you go through this. So that brings me to the question, Elisabeth, you're a nurse, you educate nurses. Are there other types of healthcare providers that can take advantage of your program?
Absolutely. I have physicians, acupuncturists, chiropractors, naturopaths. There are so many different people in the network, but it is. Think about the other thing. The American Medical Association is generally still thinking of cannabis as a drug of abuse, right? And why? Because it's been stigmatized and prohibited for about 100 years, since 1934. And then you've got all of these recreational markets that are selling high potency THC products, and you've got all these youth that are using it excessively. And coming up with cannabis hyperemesis syndrome, cannabis use disorder, etc. They're not using it in a medical fashion. And so the doctors are still saying, hey, this is a problem. They're not looking at it from the lens that we're looking at. Now, the other thing that happened is September 27th, 23, the American Nursing Association deemed cannabis nursing a specialty. So there was a document that was written called the Scope and Standards of Nursing, of Cannabis Nursing, and it was approved by the ANA. And now they're working on creating board certification, just like you have for palliative care and psychiatric care and cancer care and all of this. There will be cannabis care that nurses are going to be able to sit and get board certified for. Our training is teaching to that level, to train nurses. And so our focus should be nurses, but there isn't a whole lot of other programs that are, training providers. So of course we train everybody. There is Medical Marijuana 411 run by Ethan Russo, and he is a famous neurologist and MPH. Good friend of mine, and he's issuing CMA for doctors. So there is that as well. But our sweet spot is nurses. There's 5 million nurses in America, and not only do we teach them this incredible curriculum, but you mentioned a business in a box. So that is our toolkit and our mastermind, and that's separate because there's nurses that work in a hospital that are like, I just want to be the most valuable player in this, theme on my unit. So, people coming in, say somebody's working oncology, the nurses should have a basic understanding of cannabinoids because 42% of cancer patients are using cannabis as an additional option for their nausea, their pain, their sleep, etc. So nurses on the units need to learn this. But if, say, a nurse wants, like my age, somebody in their 50s that's like, I'm about to retire. I want to do some holistic health coaching, and I would like to have my own business. Okay, we teach them everything that they could possibly need to know to start their own business, different corporate structure entities, how to set up their business, how to market their business, and then all of the forms and registrations, resources, etc., to see patients. So an intake, a form. All of the different assessments for pediatrics and geriatrics and adults, and then all of the care plans that we have filled out all for them already. So here's examples for dementia. Here's examples for autism. Here's examples for epilepsy. Here's examples for chronic pain, diverticulitis, Crohn's disease, some of the other things. And then we give them the patient teaching, an ebook, and the resources that they can give to the patient, because they shouldn't have to reinvent everything. So and I created this with a licensing program. I went to this literary agent back in 2019 and in 2020 when I was setting up the online programs, and created a licensing where they can buy this business in a box, and you can get the updates every year with a fee. And so that's what I've created. So you can get the curriculum, and then for $300 you get the entire toolkit of everything you need for the business in a box, plus a year mastermind. So the first Monday of every month, we are in, for an hour and a half to 2 hours, we're with a room full of people on Zoom through the network that are in the mastermind. And we're going through best practices, new research, business updates, legislative updates, so that we're teaching them to be the best of the best. So that when you come through Holistic Caring and Green Nurse Academy, you are somebody special.
Yeah. So I mean, it's so in depth as to what you're doing. It's inclusive, educational. I love how there's coaching inside of that and allowing it to help patients. But I do want to come back to the point that there are some people that are still caught up in the stigma of it's marijuana.
Yeah.
How can you, or how do you help that person? Like, I'm interested, but I just don't know. How do you get them past the trust point of like, not only have we done it, we've got tremendous amount of people that are in our program. How can they get past that hump of saying, I'm too scared to do it?
As a provider or as a patient?
Excuse me, as a provider that wants to get involved. If there's a nurse out there, it's like, I would like to get involved, but I'm afraid of what the hospital might think. I'm afraid of what the community might think.
Well, for nurses, we have the Cannabis Nursing Scope and Standards of Practice that is, accepted by the ANA. So there's no more argument there.
Okay.
And patients are using this. Think about this. We've personally seen over 6,000 patients that have come through our practice in the past decade. And so we have incredible outcomes. We don't have them all tracked, but we're starting to create a relationship with another company that is doing data tracking. And the data is then taking health plan utilization data and pharmacy data, where we can track people that are using opioids and benzodiazepines and all the other things that we would rather them not use, and then taking those same patients and parlaying that data with the MSOs, the Curaleaf, the Trulieve, some of the big providers of cannabis, and taking the encounter data and from the POS data, the sales data from the dispensaries, and matching that. And so data is really going to help providers to be able to do this. Rescheduling, when that's finished and it's a Schedule 3, no longer Schedule 1, that will crush stigma, because now people won't have that fear of retaliation or losing their license or anything like that. Take on top of that, 50 million people in America used cannabis in the past year. So 50 million people. We're at 342 million people now in America. So a good chunk of them are using cannabis. So don't you want the value differential of a provider in the know? Don't you want to be somebody that has the answers for these people instead of somebody that's holding up a sign and blocking them?
Yeah, it's almost like, and I don't know much about the dispensaries that are out there, but anybody can go to it. Not only as the provider that you educate, so when they're there, they can educate their patient, a friend, a family member on this is what you go through in that process. Because I think people are, if you look at what's happening at a dispensary, they think it's just somebody that's going there to get a high from it. But inside a dispensary, there's so many more options in which you teach. This is how, if somebody comes in with cancer, a degenerate, joint problems, if they come in with dementia, if they come in with gut problems, here's how you can help them. It opens up a whole new opportunity for the provider.
Exactly. And we not only teach them, the how and the why, but all of the research that is, within the past 5 to 10 years. Tell me all of the modern research that is talking about all of the things you just said, and then go into the protocols of starting protocols. And here's how much CBD you would use. And generally, if you think about the endocannabinoid system going on and off all day long at the cellular level, and then think about the deficiency and the need for supplementation, right? So we want these CBD and the minor cannabinoids circulating in the bloodstream so that they can plug into the receptors to bring us back to balance and restore our physical well-being. And then think about the different onset and duration of the different products. So let's just take a tincture, right? So if you put drops under the tongue and you let that melt in and it's absorbed right into the oral mucosa, you've got an onset of about 15 minutes and then a duration of about 4 to 6 hours. So now think about, okay, when that wears off, you want to dose again so that you can continue to keep these compounds in the system. And so now we're looking at breakfast, lunch, dinner, bedtime. It's not rocket science. Just take in a little bit of CBD, breakfast, lunch, dinner, bedtime, and watch how you start feeling more at ease and some of these chronic conditions start to ameliorate. And same thing with capsules, right? And so or gummies. You've got a longer onset, an hour or so. And don't ever redose if you take it and you're like 20 minutes later I'm impatient and I don't feel anything. That's how people get into trouble, because then they stack the dose and you've got a really boosted absorption, which can make that 10 milligram gummy feel like 20. And so we don't want to do that. But the good thing about something like a gummy or a capsule is a long action, right? So long duration. And so instead of 4 to 6 hours, it's more like 8 to 10 hours, depending on dosing, of course. But, that's why we have inhalation. So go back to that 1-to-1 vape pen. You've got somebody that, or dryer vaporizer with CBD flower. So they can take a couple of puffs of something with, higher balance of CBD than THC. And that's your short acting, right? So now you've got immediacy because it goes right into the lung, straight up to the blood, the brain, and crosses the blood-brain barrier. And then it can distribute through the body. And so you've got the short acting and the long acting. And this is what I teach people in pain management, that are really managing severe chronic pain. And we can literally take half the dose of opioids within a week with some of these programs. And walk people away from opioids. There are so many people that are finding their freedom from that. And that is, we've lost 75,000 people just last year from opioids. And it needs to stop. And cannabinoids can be something that we can really use.
Yeah. So that tells me that people are searching for options instead of just the opioids. So an opportunity for your business would be pain medicine physicians as well, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I'd love for you to share a success story of, let's say I was of a nurse coming into the program, of how it's helped them, their patients, their business.
Well, gosh, we've helped so many nurses, but that is really where my heart really opens, and seeing the nurses coming through the mastermind. I have a couple of different examples. Kathy just told me last month in the mastermind that she's in Kentucky working with a brand new dispensary, and it's vertically integrated. And what that means is that they're cultivating, they're growing the plants, they're manufacturing, and they're selling in the dispensary. And so she started as a nurse in the cultivation side, and she learned all about growing and the different cannabinoids and terpenes and phenotypes and all of this that is down to that level. Then she was working in the manufacturing side and seeing how the medicines are being made, and now she's going to start working in the dispensary as a coach. And so when it comes to the cannabis industry, you start where you can. Right. And it doesn't even matter if you're making $15 an hour, because you're getting in on an opportunity that is going to continue to grow. And if you keep putting your hand up and saying, I am qualified to do the next and the next and the next, then you're going to be the most valuable player in that team. I have another nurse, Carrie, in Long Island, New York, and she actually is a survivor of breast cancer. She started to use cannabis as a therapeutic option for herself during chemotherapy, and said, wow, this really helps. She found out, she took our programs. Now she's teaching other nurses in oncology, where she's working at the hospital. She's phasing out, semi-retired, but she's now working as a coach and a liaison to train the other nurses there. She's also working in the community and speaking to people in the community and at a breast cancer resource center. And so this is where I get to see the fruits of our labor, to create these programs, to create the training, to create the masterminds and the business in a box so that they can go out and be proficient.
Yeah. So what would you say is the vision of your business over the next 3 to 5 years?
Gosh, there's 5 million nurses in America. I would love to see, at least half of them go through the programs and really be the caring option. Nurses are so special, right? Because they're the educators, the healers, the guides, the advocates in that point of care, wherever somebody is, in a clinic, in the hospital, whatever. And nurses can be that bridge to a better way, away from the pills and procedures, away from the pharmaceuticals, away from the hopelessness of many of the patients that are like, I can't take these drugs, so I'm just white knuckling it. No, there's a way to have holistic living with the cannabinoids. And so my goal is to have, a good chunk of the nurses trained, and then to work with, some of these other companies even to help elaborate on how every provider of all stripes needs to get a base education, and to be able to be a hero to their patients rather than an obstacle. So that's on the provider side. And then on the industry side, I'm actually applying for state contracts to educate the dispensary bud tenders. We call them bud tenders. It's like a bartender, but it's in the dispensary. But like for instance, in Minnesota, they're going to require that the bud tenders are going to be certified medical cannabis consultants. And so they're going to have a much higher threshold of minimal education so that they can support patients. Not as a provider, there's a firm line that you don't cross to practice medicine, because no bud tender should say, well, here's exactly what you need to be taking and how and the dosing. But they can give them general parameters and how to begin something that is sane, that is more tailored for them and to keep them safe. So I'm also working to expand that.
Okay. You're busy. That's for sure. So I want people to be able to take action from this podcast, whether they are, general population or a nurse, a chiropractor, a physician. I'll share all of your links for everything that this goes to, but how would you like people to reach out to you to learn more, especially about your trainings that you offer and the mastermind?
Yeah, so just go to holisticcaring.com. Email us at info@holisticcaring.com. That comes right to me or to our staff. When you go to holisticcaring.com, right on the homepage, there's a little button that says join the network. And that network takes you right into the community. You can join the free programs. We have an introduction to cannabis that's free. We have ABCs of CBD that is free. We have the community. We have a plant medicine support group that meets the last Monday of every month. And that's all at no cost. And then if you want to purchase programs, then you do that on the website. There's professional programs, patient programs. And on the homepage also at holisticcaring.com is a video where I created talking about healthcare 3.0 and cannabis 3.0, how they're coming together and merging, and what our future vision is for cannabis therapeutics in healthcare. And I give a tour of that big program that I was talking about, the Cannabis Health Coach program. Right. So that is all on the website. So holisticcaring.com, 2 C's in the middle. That's the best way to find us. And then on the CBD side, if you want to just explore some of the best CBD in America, it's bloomhemp.com. And bloomhemp.com, and then you can click shop now, go in there and look at all of the different products. There's 23 different SKUs, 30 different products and different potencies. And then the services tab has the intake form where you could complete that. It comes to us. We'll respond within 24 hours with a free care plan. And a provider can do that and just test the process and say, here's from my mom, or whatever.
There's so much we're coming to the end here, but there's so much more that we can discuss for sure. We'll end up putting together another show that allows you to highlight specifically a few segments of this. But last 2 questions here, if I could, Elisabeth. Being a nurse, being in healthcare, being in this CBD component, how it's changing people's lives. If you could give us one piece of advice that would change our health in a positive way, what would that be?
Well, start at the root, right? When people think about chronic care, which we all have, if you're over 50, you've got something that you're managing, or even over 40. Right. Acute care is great for infections and surgeries and accidents and that sort of thing. But when it comes to managing things that are in disarray in some way, look at the root. Go back to the endocannabinoid system that regulates all other systems and start to supplement that. And and pair that with increasing your rest, your movement, your nutrition, and your connection, your connection with other people, finding joy. Don't just go from the the cubicle to the car to the couch, and repeat that. No, that's not healthy living. And I see so many times people neglect their health until it's late, and you can. That's the other side of this. So on the preventative side, make sure that you're nourishing the endocannabinoid system with all of the good, healthy living that we just talked about: rest, connection, diet, and movement, and then supplement, with good CBD. That's the starting point for everybody. You don't have to even go to a dispensary. You can just get really good CBD, like at bloomhemp.com. And that is going to really help restore that system, helping you start at the root for repair and restoration. And then on a preventative basis, as we're aging, as we're starting to get a little stiff, as we're starting to get, slowdown in cognition, etc., or even anti-proliferative issues or for cancer. Like, I don't think I'm ever going to get cancer because I take so many cannabinoids every day. Knock on wood. But that's the point, right? Mm-hmm. Don't wait until it's too late.
Yeah, great point. Too many people end up having, and I can speak from some family members that wouldn't take products like you're suggesting because of the stigma with it. It's unfortunate. Had they known at the start, and it always goes back to the provider didn't tell them that either. Mm-hmm. So you're getting it on so many levels by educating, general population, educating a provider that can help the general population. You're doing your best to make us a better world, and I really do appreciate that. So thank you. Absolutely, my pleasure, Elizabeth. The last question, your guest on the Prime Health podcast. I've loved having you. What would your definition of Prime Health be?
Well, gosh, where I'm waking up refreshed every day, sleeping soundly, digestion working, no pain, or at least limited pain, and my mind is sharp as a tack. Mm-hmm. So that to me is prime health, and that's what I work in doing every day and maintaining.
Yeah, well, you must be there. I can see the smile on your face, which is great to see that through the situation. I think that's because you talk about your passion. So, Elisabeth, thank you very much for educating me specifically on this. And I can't wait for more and more people to hear this because, again, you started in healthcare. You advanced up the ropes in medical modern healthcare itself. And then unfortunately had an incident that said, hey, I need to look for something else. And by coincidence, you were, provided some THC and CBD that said, this will help you feel better. That opened up your eyes. Now all you're trying to do is help other people open that next door for them in their business. So I commend you for that very much. I tell people on the podcast, if you've heard or saw one thing from this, and there's a whole lot of things that Elisabeth covered, but if there's one thing a friend, family member, or a physician, clinician, nurse, anything can take advantage of, please do share this. It's going to take one person at a time. She would love to have the 5 million nurses, but she'll take a few more one at a time. But we want to get it in the hands of those people that can benefit from it because it's not just the nurse, it's the nurse's patients that they can see. So she's spreading a great message along. So selfishly, I always do say, please subscribe to our podcast. It's important that you do that. But until next time, remember that true wellness is a journey we are all on together. Whether you're taking charge of your own health or guiding others in theirs, every step forward matters. So please do stay committed to your Prime Health journey. And again, Elisabeth, thank you very much for being a great guest on the Prime Health podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm honored, and God bless.